The mess hall of the Galactic Alliance battleship Eternal Dawn buzzed with the sound of young soldiers talking and laughing. Their voices bounced off the metal walls as they gathered around the large holographic display in the center of the room. The blue light from the display lit up their faces as they watched old recordings from Earth's history. Commander Do-hyun stood in the shadows near the back wall. His battle-scarred face stayed calm as he watched his young recruits make fun of the human footage playing before them. He had served in the Alliance military for over 30 years, and his body showed the marks of many battles. His right hand was now cybernetic, made of shining metal that moved as smoothly as flesh. His left eye glowed with a soft blue light, a reminder of the time he almost died saving his human teammates. "This is ridiculous," Lieutenant Kita said, pointing at the display. His scaled skin sparkled under the lights as he laughed. "Look at these humans fighting with metal sticks and hiding behind stone walls. How did they ever survive long enough to join us in space?" The hologram showed scenes from old Earth battles. Soldiers fought with what the young aliens saw as simple weapons: rifles, tanks, and artillery. To them, it looked primitive compared to their plasma rifles and energy shields. Private Yanjai leaned forward, her antennae twitching with amusement. "And what about these strange creatures they believed in? Dragons and monsters and spirits." She waved her hand through the hologram, making the image ripple. "They really thought huge flying lizards breathed fire. How can such a backward species be our allies now?" Sergeant Haenul joined in, his ceremonial markings glowing faintly as he spoke. "I heard they used to think little invisible beings caused diseases. They didn't even know about basic cellular theory until a few hundred years ago." The laughter grew louder. More young soldiers gathered around, eager to join in making fun of what they saw as primitive human beliefs. None of them noticed how their commander's cybernetic hand tightened slightly, or how his organic eye narrowed as he watched them. Do-hyun remembered things these young ones had never seen. He remembered fighting alongside humans in the brutal Nexus War. He had seen what humans could do when pushed to their limits. He knew truths about Earth's history that most Alliance members refused to believe. "Show us more about their myths," someone called out. The computer responded, displaying images of creatures from human legend. Dragons soaring through stormy skies, great sea monsters rising from ocean depths, fierce warriors facing impossible odds with nothing but courage and steel. "Their whole history is full of made-up stories," Kita said, shaking his head. "They probably invented most of their past to sound more impressive. No species could survive fighting with such basic technology." Do-hyun stepped forward then, his boots making soft sounds on the metal floor. The younger soldiers didn't notice him at first, too busy laughing at an image of human knights charging into battle. "You find their history amusing?" he asked quietly. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried authority earned in real combat. The laughter died immediately as the young soldiers realized their commander was there. They all straightened up, trying to look proper and professional. Kite's scales shifted to a more formal pattern, and Yanji's antennae pulled back in respect. "Commander, we were just..." Haenul started to explain, but Do-hyun held up his cybernetic hand. "Tell me, Sergeant Haenul," he said, walking slowly toward the holographic display. "Have you ever faced an enemy who adapted faster than your targeting computer could track?" "No, sir," Haenul admitted. His markings dimmed slightly. "Have any of you ever had to fight when your energy weapons failed? When your shields dropped and your advanced armor was useless?" Do-hyun looked around the room, meeting each soldier's eyes in turn. None of them spoke. "I have," he continued, "alongside humans during the Nexus War." He reached out and touched the holographic controls. The image changed to show a battlefield on a distant world. The recording was shaky, captured by Do-hyun's own cybernetic eye during combat. Alliance soldiers fought alongside humans against a wave of shifting, changing creatures, the dreaded swarm that had nearly destroyed 3 galaxies. Energy weapons flashed and shields flickered, but the enemy kept coming. "Watch carefully," Do-hyun told his silent crew. Watch what happens when our advanced technology failed us. The recording showed the moment their energy weapons stopped working. The swarm had adapted, developing shields that absorbed and redirected plasma bolts. Alliance soldiers fell back in panic and confusion. But the humans didn't retreat. Instead, they pulled out what looked like primitive backup weapons, solid projectile guns, explosives, and even what appeared to be swords and spears made of special metals. Look at their faces, Do-hyun said softly. Do you see fear? Do you see soldiers ready to give up because their advanced weapons failed? The young aliens watched in silence. The humans in the recording fought with a fierce determination. They used simple weapons in complex ways, combining old technology with new tactics. They adapted their fighting style instantly when something didn't work. Your laughter shows how little you understand, Do-hyun said. He zoomed in on one human soldier who fought with both a plasma rifle and what looked like an ancient sword. You see primitive weapons and laugh. You hear their old stories and mock them. But you miss the deeper truth. He turned to face his crew fully. Humans didn't survive for thousands of years because they were lucky. They survived because they learned to adapt. Every story you laugh at, every myth you mock, they all contain lessons learned in blood and fire. Private Yanji raised her hand hesitantly. But sir, surely the creatures in their myths weren't real. Dragons and monsters. Do-hyun's organic eye fixed on her. Tell me, Private, what do you know about Earth's ancient history? About the time before humans became the dominant species? Only what we learned at the Academy, sir. That Earth had several extinction events, and humans evolved after the last one. And what if I told you that humans didn't just imagine dragons? Do-hyun asked. What if their legends of great flying creatures that breathed fire came from inherited memories? From a time when their ancestors had to survive against beings that make our current enemies look tame. The room fell silent again. Do-hyun continued. Those primitive weapons you mock. Some of them were designed to fight creatures our modern science still struggles to explain. Those simple battle tactics, they were developed through thousands of years of warfare, not just against other humans, but against things that left marks in their very DNA. He walked around the holographic display, letting his words sink in. You see a species that took too long to develop space travel. I see a species that survived challenges that would have destroyed most civilizations. You laugh at their myths of monsters and demons. I've fought alongside them and seen why they keep those stories alive. Keita spoke up, his scales now showing patterns of deep thought. But Commander, why doesn't the Alliance database contain this information? Why aren't we taught these things at the Academy? Because, Lieutenant, Do-hyun said with a slight smile, sometimes the truth is harder to accept than fiction. It's easier to believe humans are simply a young, lucky species than to face what their survival really means. He paused, looking at each of his crew members. It means there are things in this universe far stranger and more dangerous than our science can explain. Things the humans never forgot, even when they built starships and joined the Alliance. The commander touched the controls one last time, bringing up an image of Earth. Their planet looks peaceful now, doesn't it? A jewel of blue and green, home to one of our strongest allies. But look closer. Look at their mountains, their oceans, their deep forests. Look at the scars on their world that our scientists still can't explain. And remember, humans didn't just survive there. They thrived. They built civilizations. They kept their old knowledge while developing new technology. He straightened up, his cybernetic eye glowing brighter. The next time you want to laugh at human myths or mock their history, remember this. They don't tell those stories to impress anyone. They tell them to remember, to warn, to prepare. And if you're wise, you'll start listening to those stories more carefully, because the dangers they speak of. He gestured to the battlefield recording, still playing silently beside the Earth image. Some of them are still out there, and humans might be the only ones who really remember how to fight them. The mess hall remained quiet as Du Hyun's words stank in. The young soldiers looked at the human historical recordings with new eyes, seeing past what they had thought was primitive to recognize something deeper. They began to understand that sometimes the oldest stories contained the most important truths, and that their human allies might be far more remarkable than they had realized. Commander Du Hyun left them to their thoughts, his footsteps echoing in the silent room. He had planted a seed of understanding in their minds. Now they would begin to learn what he had discovered years ago, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't in their technology or their weapons, but in their ability to remember, to adapt, and to survive against odds that would break most species. The holographic display continued to show scenes from human history, but no one was laughing anymore. 3 days after Commander Do Hyun's speech in the mess hall, the Eternal Dawn received emergency orders. The massive battleship changed course, its engines glowing bright against the darkness of space. They were headed to a human colony world called New Eden, where something had gone very wrong. Lieutenant Kita stood at his post on the bridge, his scaled skin now showing patterns of worry instead of amusement. The ship's sensors showed strange readings from the colony, readings that didn't make any sense to the Alliance's advanced technology. "Report," Commander Do Hyun ordered as he walked onto the bridge. His cybernetic eye glowed brighter than usual, scanning the data streams flowing across the main screens. "Sir, we're picking up energy patterns that don't match anything in our database," Kita said. His voice was steady, but his scales rippled with uncertainty. The human colonists sent out a distress signal, but it's garbled. We can only make out a few words. Do Hyun nodded. "Play the message." The ship's speakers crackled with static. Through the noise, they heard a human voice. "They're coming through just like the old stories. Need immediate. The barriers are failing. They're real. They're all real." The message ended in more static. The bridge crew looked at each other nervously. Private Yunji, who was manning the communication station, tried to clean up the signal but couldn't get anything else from it. "Sir," Sergeant Hin Newell called from his security station, "the colony's defense systems are active, but they're not detecting any ships in orbit. No sign of pirates or known hostile species." Do Hyun walked to the main viewport, his cybernetic hand clasped behind his back. "What do you see when you look at that planet?" he asked his crew. The young aliens studied the view of New Eden. It looked peaceful: blue oceans, green forests, white clouds swirling in its atmosphere. But something about it made their instincts scream danger. "The readings are wrong," Kita said slowly. "The energy patterns, they remind me of something, but I can't remember what." "They remind you of the old human recordings we watched," Do Hyun said quietly. "The ones you all laughed at a few days ago. The ones showing their ancient battles against things they called demons." The bridge fell silent. Do Hyun turned to face his crew. Humanity didn't just make up stories about demons and dark spirits. They encountered real beings, creatures that existed partly in our universe and partly in another. Beings that could slip through the spaces between realities. He walked to Kita's station and pointed to one of the energy readings. "This pattern here. It matches recordings from Earth's past, from times when the barriers between dimensions grew thin. The humans learned to recognize these signs thousands of years before they developed space travel." "But that's impossible," Yunji said, her antennae twitching rapidly. "The Academy teaches us that interdimensional travel is purely theoretical. Even our most advanced scientists haven't figured out how to break through to other realities." Do Hyun smiled grimly. "And yet humanity's oldest stories talk about exactly that. They developed ways to fight creatures that could step between worlds. They built weapons and barriers using knowledge we're only beginning to understand." He touched a control panel, bringing up an image of the colony's main settlement. The buildings were a mix of modern Alliance architecture and what looked like much older human designs. And around the entire colony ran a strange pattern of metal lines embedded in the ground. "Look at these markings," Do Hyun said. "The Alliance engineers probably thought they were just decoration, or maybe some human cultural tradition. But they're not. They're protection circles, designs developed over thousands of years of human experience with interdimensional intrusion. Hamul leaned forward, studying the patterns. "Sir, are you saying the humans knew this could happen? That they built defenses against it?" "They never forgot," Du Hyun said. "Even when they reached the stars, even when they joined the Alliance and gained access to our technology, they kept their old knowledge. They remembered the times when reality itself grew thin, when things from other dimensions tried to break through." The commander brought up more data on the main screen. "Look at the colony's construction records. See these special alloys they used in their foundations. The Alliance approved them because they met our building standards, but no one asked why the humans insisted on using these specific materials." Ki-Te's scales shifted to a pattern showing sudden understanding. "The metals. They're like the sword in that battle recording you showed us. The one that could affect enemies our energy weapons couldn't touch." "Exactly," Du Hyun said. "Humanity learned long ago that certain materials, treated in certain ways, could affect beings from other dimensions. They encoded this knowledge in their myths and legends, disguising it as stories about magic swords and blessed weapons." The ship's sensors suddenly blared an alarm. New readings appeared on the screens, massive energy spikes coming from the colony. The patterns were like nothing the Alliance computers could classify. "Sir," Yunji called out, her voice tense, "we're getting a clear transmission from the surface." A new voice filled the bridge, calm but urgent. "This is Director Sujin of New Eden Colony. We have a Class 7 breach in progress. I repeat, Class 7 breach. We've activated the old barriers, but we need immediate support. Any Alliance ships receiving this message must contact Earth Command for the Omega protocols." "This is not a drill." Do Hyun moved quickly to his command chair. "Send acknowledgement," he ordered. "And get me a direct line to Earth Command. Priority 1. As his crew rushed to comply, he spoke again, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "What you're about to see may challenge everything you think you know about reality. The humans you laughed at, the stories you mocked. You're about to learn why they keep their ancient knowledge alive." The main screen lit up with a new transmission from the surface. The young aliens watched in stunned silence as their understanding of the universe began to change forever. In the space above New Eden, where their sensors showed nothing, their eyes could now see ripples in the fabric of reality itself. "Battle stations," Du Hyun commanded. "And listen carefully to what I'm about to tell you. Humanity's oldest stories aren't just myths, they're survival guides. And we're about to need every scrap of that ancient knowledge." The asterisk Eternal Dawn's asterisk halls filled with the sound of the battle alert as the ship prepared for combat. But this wouldn't be a normal fight. They were about to face something that Alliance technology alone couldn't handle, something that humanity had been preparing for since before they first looked up at the stars. In his command chair, Du Hyun began explaining what they were really facing, and why humanity's myths about demons and dark spirits weren't myths at all. The young aliens listened with growing understanding and respect, finally beginning to grasp why their human allies kept such careful hold on their ancient ways. Above New Eden, the ripples in reality grew larger. The battle that was coming would teach the Alliance soldiers more about humanity's true history than any academy course ever could. And in the colony below, ancient barriers built with knowledge passed down through countless human generations prepared to hold back the darkness between worlds once again. The asterisk Eternal Dawn asterisk descended through New Eden's atmosphere, its massive hull glowing red from the heat of entry. Inside the ship, Commander Du Hyun briefed his crew on what they were about to face. The young aliens listened with growing amazement as their commander explained humanity's true history. "Earth Command has authorized me to share classified information," Du Hyun said, his cybernetic eye projecting images onto the briefing room's main screen. "What you're about to learn has been kept secret not because humans wanted to hide it, but because most species weren't ready to accept it." The screen showed ancient human cave paintings, drawings that were thousands of years old. But these weren't the simple hunting scenes the aliens expected. These images showed detailed diagrams of reality itself, patterns of energy and matter that matched the Alliance's most advanced scientific models. Humans didn't develop this knowledge on their own, Du-hyun explained. They learned it the hard way through countless encounters with beings from other dimensions. Their ancestors faced things that our science still struggles to explain, and they developed ways to fight back. Lieutenant Kita studied the cave paintings with new respect. His scales had shifted to a pattern showing deep concentration. These markings, they're like scientific formulas, but drawn in a way that could be passed down without advanced technology. Exactly, Du-hyun nodded. Humanity encoded their knowledge in art, in stories, in songs. What we thought were simple myths about demons and spirits were actually detailed instructions for recognizing and fighting interdimensional threats. The ship shuddered as it broke through the cloud layer. Through the viewport, they could see New Eden's main colony spread out below them. The metal patterns in the ground were glowing now, pulsing with a strange light that made the alien crew's vision blur. Director Soo-jin, Du-hyun called over the comm system. "We're approaching your position. What's your status?" The human colony director's voice came through clearly. "The old barriers are holding for now, Commander. But we've got multiple Class 7 entities trying to break through. We've activated all the ancient defenses, but we need your help for what comes next." Do-hyun turned to his crew. "This is why we're here. The colony's modern defenses can't stop these beings, but they were never meant to. Look at the building pattern of the colony itself." He brought up a map showing the settlement from above. The aliens gasped as they saw it with new eyes. What had looked like random city planning was actually an enormous pattern, with every building and street placed with careful purpose. "The entire colony is one giant protective circle," Private Yanji whispered, her antennae quivering with sudden understanding. Even the newest buildings were placed to strengthen the old patterns. "Now you're beginning to understand," Du-hyun said. "Humanity never abandoned their old knowledge. They built their new world on top of the old protections, using modern technology to enhance ancient defenses." The ship's sensors suddenly screamed with alerts. The fabric of reality itself seemed to twist in front of them. Through gaps that shouldn't exist, the crew caught glimpses of something vast and impossible. "Those are the entities," Du-hyun said calmly. "Beings that exist in multiple dimensions at once. Our normal weapons can't hurt them, but humanity's ancient weapons can." He opened a weapons locker that none of the crew had noticed before. Inside were things that looked both old and new at the same time. Swords made of strange metal that seemed to bend light around them. Rifles that combined modern technology with materials that were thousands of years old. Earth Command knew this day would come, Du-hyun explained as he handed out the weapons. These were made using both human ancient knowledge and Alliance technology. The metals were mined from specific places on Earth, places where reality had grown thin thousands of years ago. Surgeon Hae-Newell held one of the rifles carefully, feeling its strange weight. The patterns on these, they're like the ones in the cave paintings. Those patterns are mathematical formulas expressed in a way that affects multiple dimensions at once, Du-hyun said. Humanity's ancestors learned to create them through centuries of fighting these entities. They passed down the knowledge through stories about magical symbols and protective runes. The ship landed near the colony's central plaza. Through the viewports, the crew could see human colonists manning positions along the glowing barrier lines. They weren't running in panic. Instead, they moved with practiced precision, like they had trained for this their whole lives. Because they had, Du-hyun said, seeming to read his crew's thoughts. Every human colony has people specially trained in the old ways. They learn both modern science and ancient knowledge. Director Soo-jin isn't just a colonial administrator. She's also a keeper of the old knowledge. As if to prove his words, they saw Soo-jin walking toward their ship. She wore modern Alliance armor, but it was covered in patterns that matched the glowing lines in the ground. In her hands, she held what looked like a sword made of the same strange metal as their new weapons. "Commander," She greeted them as they disembarked. "Your timing is perfect. The entities are about to make their big push. Are your crew ready to learn why we keep the old ways alive?" Do-hyun looked at his young aliens, seeing the change in them from just a few days ago. Gone was the mockery of human traditions. Now they stood ready to fight alongside humans, holding weapons that bridged the gap between ancient knowledge and modern science. "They're ready," he said. "They've begun to understand that humanity's greatest strength isn't their technology. It's their memory." The air itself seemed to tear open above them. Through the gaps in reality, massive shapes moved in ways that hurt to look at. The colony's barriers flared brighter, ancient patterns of energy meeting the force of beings from another dimension. "Remember your training," Soo-jin called out to everyone. "The patterns are mathematics. The symbols are science. Everything humanity learned, everything we pass down in our stories. It was all for moments like this." The young aliens took their positions alongside the human defenders. They watched in amazement as Soo-jin began reciting what sounded like an old poem, but the words made the strange metal of their weapons vibrate with power. "That's not just a poem," Do-hyun told them as he checked his own weapon. "It's a complex mathematical formula expressed in a way that can be easily memorized and passed down. The rhythm of the words matters as much as their meaning. It helps create the right energy patterns." Above them, the entities began their assault on the barriers. Reality itself seemed to bend and twist as ancient human knowledge faced beings from beyond normal space and time. The battle for New Eden was about to begin. And with it, the Alliance soldiers would learn the full truth about humanity's long history of defending reality itself. Do-hyun raised his weapon, its strange metal glowing with power from both technology and ancient knowledge. "Now you'll see why humans never forgot their old stories," he told his crew. "Now you'll understand why every myth, every legend, every old tale had a purpose. They weren't just remembering the past. They were preparing for the future." The entities struck the barriers, and the true battle began. In that moment, as human knowledge and Alliance technology worked together against impossible enemies, the young aliens finally understood. Humanity's myths weren't primitive superstitions. They were survival guides written in blood and memory, passed down through generations who never forgot what lurked in the spaces between worlds. Reality bent and twisted above New Eden as the interdimensional entities launched their full attack. The colony's ancient barriers glowed with power, their light mixing with the strange energies from the beings trying to break through. Commander Do-hyun led his crew alongside the human defenders, facing enemies that most of the galaxy didn't even believe existed. Lieutenant Kita fired his hybrid weapon at a spot where reality had torn open. The strange metal of the gun hummed with energy as it released a blast that combined modern technology with ancient human knowledge. His scales shifted to show amazement as he saw the effect. The shot didn't just hit the entity, it forced it back into its own dimension. "The metal remembers," Director Soo-jin called out as she moved between defensive positions. "That's what our ancestors learned. Certain materials remember their contact with other dimensions. We didn't just mine these metals, we taught them." Private Yanji watched in wonder as Soo-jin swung her sword in precise patterns. The blade left trails of light in the air, and where those trails crossed, they formed mathematical equations that the human hadn't drawn but that the sword somehow remembered. "Each pattern is a formula," Do-hyun explained as he fought beside his crew. "The sword remembers how reality should be shaped. The movements aren't just fighting forms, they're mathematical proofs written in light and energy." The entities pressed harder against the barriers. Through the gaps in space, the defenders caught glimpses of impossible geometries and colors that shouldn't exist. But the humans didn't show fear. Instead, they moved with confidence born from thousands of years of preserved knowledge. Surgeon Hae-newell worked with a team of human engineers at one of the barrier nodes. They were reinforcing the ancient patterns with modern power systems, but doing it in ways that looked more like a ritual than science. "The movements matter," one engineer told him as they worked. "Our ancestors learned that certain ways of moving, certain rhythms and patterns affect how energy flows between dimensions. We're not just powering the barriers, we're teaching them how to reject what doesn't belong in our reality. Above the colony, the tiers in space grew larger. The entities were pushing harder, trying to force their way fully into this dimension. But now, Du-hyun's crew understood why the humans had built their colony the way they had. Every street, every building, every metal line in the ground was part of a vast mathematical equation written in architecture and engineering. "Look at how they're moving," Kita called out, pointing at the human defenders. All across the colony, humans were moving in coordinated patterns. Some fired weapons, others worked with equipment, but all their movements followed specific rhythms. "They're calculating," Du-hyun said proudly. "Every motion is part of a bigger equation. What looks like ritual is actually higher mathematics expressed through movement." Their ancestors learned that some calculations have to be performed with more than just numbers. The entities suddenly pulled back, gathering their strength for one massive push. The gaps in reality widened, showing more of the impossible space beyond. But Director Soo-jin smiled, and Du-hyun nodded in understanding. "They're doing exactly what we wanted," Soo-jin announced to all defenders. "Get ready to show our alien friends why humans still practice our old combat dances." All across the colony, humans began to move in perfect synchronization. Their weapons traced patterns in the air, their feet followed paths laid out in the streets, and their voices joined in what sounded like an ancient song, but was actually a complex formula expressed in rhythm and tone. "Join us," Soo-jin called to the alien crew. "Follow our movements. Let the weapons guide you. They remember the patterns even if you don't know them." Do-hyun's crew felt their hybrid weapons humming with energy. The strange metals seemed eager to move in certain ways. As they followed these impulses, they found themselves joining the human defenders in their synchronized movements. "The metals remember," Do-hyun explained as he led his crew through the patterns. "They remember how reality should be, how to reject things that don't belong. Every movement we make reinforces that memory." The entities launched their final assault. The sky above New Eden seemed to shatter as they tried to force their way through. But now the entire colony moved as one. Humans and aliens together, their movements guided by ancient knowledge preserved in story and song and metal. The hybrid weapons fired in perfect rhythm. Soo-jin's sword carved equations in light. The barrier nodes pulsed with power drawn from both technology and memory. And throughout it all, the defenders moved in patterns that had been passed down since humans first learned to fight beings from beyond normal space. Reality itself seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a sound that existed in mathematics rather than air, the barriers flared with blinding light. The patterns built into the colony's very streets lit up all at once, and the entities found themselves caught in an equation too complex to break. "Now," Soo-jin shouted, "complete the calculation." Every defender raised their weapons. The strange metals sang with power, and as one, they performed the final movements of an equation that had been written in human memory since before they built their first cities. The entities were forced back. The tiers in reality began to close. The impossible geometries and colors retreated before an equation proved in metal and motion and memory. The hybrid weapons fired one last synchronized volley, and the gaps sealed themselves with a sound like mathematics solving itself. As the light faded and normal reality reasserted itself, Kita looked at his weapon with new respect. "The metal really does remember," he said softly. "All this time, we thought humans were primitive for using physical weapons alongside energy ones, but they knew something we didn't. They knew many things," Do-hyun agreed. "They knew that some knowledge can't be stored in computers. Some things have to be remembered in deeper ways. In stories, in movements, in the very materials we use to defend ourselves." Director Soo-jin walked over to them, her sword still humming quietly with mathematical energy. "Now you understand," she said to the alien crew, "why we keep our old ways alongside the new. Why we still train in what looks like ritual combat. Why we insist on using certain materials in our colonies. The young aliens nodded, their earlier mockery of human traditions completely forgotten. They had seen the truth that humanity had preserved for thousands of years. They had felt it in the strange metals of their weapons, seen it in the patterns of the colony's streets, heard it in the rhythms of what they had thought were simple poems and songs. Your myths weren't myths at all, Yunji said with newfound respect. They were teaching tools, weren't they? Ways to remember complex knowledge that had to be preserved exactly right. Everything we did, everything we built, served a purpose, Su Jin confirmed. The stories about demons taught us to recognize interdimensional intrusion. The legends about magic swords taught us which materials could affect beings from other realities. The old combat dances taught us how to move in ways that reinforced the structure of space itself. Do Hyun looked at his crew with pride. They had learned what he had discovered years ago, that humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology or their weapons, but their ability to remember, to preserve vital knowledge through generations, hiding complex scientific truths in forms that could survive the collapse of civilizations. The next time you hear a human story, he told his crew, remember this day. Remember that what sounds like myth might be mathematics. What looks like ritual might be advanced physics. What feels like magic might be science so complex it had to be hidden in poetry to be preserved. Above them, the sky over New Eden was clear again. Reality had been defended by the combined efforts of human memory and Alliance technology. And in the streets of the colony, ancient patterns still glowed softly, ready to protect against the next intrusion from the spaces between dimensions. The young aliens had learned a lesson they would never forget. Humanity hadn't survived for thousands of years by luck. They had survived because they never forgot their oldest battles, their deepest knowledge, their most important truths. Every story, every tradition, every piece of what seemed like primitive superstition had a purpose. They had learned that sometimes the oldest knowledge was the most important, and that humanity's greatest gift to the galaxy wasn't their technology or their adaptability, but their memory, their ability to preserve vital truths through ages of change, hidden in plain sight in their myths and legends, waiting for the moments when they would be needed most.